Hey everyone, welcome back to my first Zero to Hero series, still in the old Path of Exile game. With today, the second and final episode, because Path of Exile 2 is almost there. In this video I will do two things. One, I will share my line of thinking on progressing through the Atlas from red maps onwards all the way to bossing and getting the void zones. And two, I will take you through the endgame stages of the build and explain the build plus some of the alterations that I've made. Let's talk about Atlas completion. We left off halfway through yellow maps, and here you can see all white and yellow maps have been completed. I think it makes sense, especially in a league start scenario, to take it a little slow in solo self-found. There's really not much reason to rush towards red maps, and if anything, it's going to slow you down because you die, you lose experience, and you're not getting stronger. For reference, here's what my Atlas tree looks like at running tier 10 maps. It's a combination of strongboxes, ritual and map nodes. As you're making your way through red maps, you start encountering more and more bosses. The Polaric chick isn't too difficult, just make sure you're in the opposite element of her attacks. So if she does fire laser beams, get in the cold zone, and if she summons an avalanche, get in the hot zone. The Rhythm guy here, also not too hard. In the intermittent phase, follow the streams to find your way back and don't stand on top of him when he's burrowed. A little later, we're doing the Eater of Worlds and also the Searing Exarch, two fun fights I think, and also two reality checks because single target damage around level 85 or 90 on this build with this gear just isn't amazing. I think I'm doing between 1 and 1.5 million damage, which is in line with the path of building, but that's not a lot of damage for these bosses. You can do it, but it's not super comfy, so be aware of that. Still, I think you should push for it at this point, because both bosses get you a void stone and that is super helpful to sustain maps. Talking about maps, let me give you an overview of some of the unique maps that I got. Some of these I got around level 96, so don't be deterred if they don't drop for you. A good chunk you get from Kirek, the common ones. You saw in the previous episode I got 3 unique maps from Ritual. The Putrid Cloister dropped from a boss in a tier 14 map while using a bossing Maven Witness tree. The Coward's Trail is given to me by the Nameless Seer, who shows up in tier 14 plus maps I think, especially if you put some pack size on those. Oba's Cursed Trove drops from Doedry in the Sepulchre map in tier 16, so also quite late. And finally the Twilight Temple I get all the way at the end from a scouting report. In parallel with progressing the Atlas, you need to progress the build using the loadouts in Path of Building. We left off around the level 80 mark where we swapped to the White Wind weapon. We were still on a 4-link and we were doing tier 10 content. First up is a 5-link, which we already dropped in the last episode, but I didn't have enough chromatic orbs to get the right colors on it. You can see my gear while I'm spanning chromatic orbs, and there's only one unique on me at the moment, the White Wind, which is a very common unique. I have no other uniques just yet. I finally land on red, green, blue, which isn't ideal, but I can make it work. I decide to spam some essences, hoping to turn this 5-link into something good enough to wear. I'm settling for this at the moment. I craft myself another pair of boots to offset the loss of resistances and then swap a bunch of gems around. Having this 5-link is a good DPS increase and the build instantly feels better. From here I'm using Faustus to get uniques I know are fairly common, starting with belts. It doesn't take me all that long to get a Perseverance, which is what the guide recommends. You're not stacking much armor or evasion, but having Fortify when you stun is a good defensive layer, and although we don't consistently stun, it's better than nothing. Later, we get a more consistent Fortify from our chest using Eldritch Currency, and then the Onslaught this belt provides is a nice quality of life feature. A little later, I get a Blizzard Crown from a Ritual, and 80 to 120 flat cold damage is quite a lot. Yes, the resistances are treated as 10% increased, which is a downside, but I still feel I did way more damage. Besides, I have a 25% chance to treat resistances as inverted, and I'm assuming that also works on this Blizzard Crown, so 25% of the time the downside is actually an upside. This Blizzard Crown is a placeholder anyway until we find the much rarer Heat Shiver. Just a few maps later, again in Ritual, I stumbled upon the Dark Grey Vectors, my best in slot boots until the very end game. Great boots, and we're scaling with frenzy charges, both offensively and defensively, thanks to endurance charges. The Slayer gets the same maximum endurance charges as frenzy charges after all. With all this gear, I'm progressing red maps nicely, and finally in tier 15 I am dropping my first 6-link. It has almost perfect colors and I can make this work for sure. Perfect would be 3 reds instead of 3 greens, but that just means I went into the path building to see what green support gem would give the most damage, and PoE said it would be added cold damage support, so that is what I went for. Again, after such a swap, it requires more fixing of resistances, and this time I'm using jewels for that. It's a small puzzle every time, but if you've saved up some decent items along the way, which you should definitely do in Solo Self-Found, you should be able to solve these challenges. One of the main drawbacks, however, of this corrupted 6-link is that I can't use Eldritch currency. Up next is more Faustus, as I've started to gamble gloves, looking for the Southbound, which adds even more added cold damage to the build. It takes a little while and a few gambling runs, spending all the gold I have at this point, which isn't that much, but finally the Southbound gloves show up. Great gloves, and they work because Frostblade of Katabasis has a damage over time component, so while my hits don't kill anything, your dot does, and you don't even notice the downside of these gloves while playing. After I got the base item, I'm looking for good corruptions, and so far I managed to get a plus max life, which is better than nothing. Ideally you get a frenzy charge on this though. Getting the gloves means that from now on I'm gambling for the heat shiver, and I'm spending a good chunk of money on that thing for sure. But after around 500,000 gold, or roughly 170 gambles, it shows up, and this is a massive DPS increase. Immediately, the build feels so much better to play yet again. Something I haven't touched on yet, but what's very important are the flasks. I've automated my flasks at this point, but every now and then, when you have enough glassblower bubbles and instilling orbs, I go back to crafting more and better flasks, like I'm doing here. It may seem trivial, but flask uptime and, for example, 1500 armor is a complete game changer in terms of defense. So having the prefix that gives a flask charge when you're critting on a 100% crit build like this one is permanent uptime of utility flasks, which cannot be understated. So take the time to improve those flasks and don't skimp out on this. In between, I get more 6-links, this time uncorrupted ones. I color them, craft them, get in the correct support gems, this time getting in the right Eldritch implicit, and with all this gear I feel like I'm ready to take on some bosses. And so I did. I will talk about that in the next section, but first let's finish this section. Very late into the game I'm also getting myself a taming, which you get from turning in 3 different barrack rings. The taming is a great ring for elemental hit builds, and it yet again provides a bunch of extra damage. Since then I've been gambling over 3 million gold hoping to get Ralakesh Impatience boots. I have the belt from Maven, but now I need to get the boots. These are super rare, but you gotta try, and I have no other use for gold because my town is still non-existent. So far, however, no luck. I got myself a double corrupted skill gem, which is lucky. A 21-23 Katabasis is clearly very good. I also got myself yet again a new 6-link armor, this time with a bunch of armor and evasion, which is noticeable. And finally, I reached level 98 at the end of the run. Small self-plug, check the description for Google Docs on all my SSF stuff, account name, POBs, atlas trees, etc. There's a Discord link in there as well. I have a guild, Thy Guild, feel free to join in-game. And don't forget to subscribe, guys. Okay, back to the video. With the build upgrades out of the way, let's go back to more bossing. We have 2 Void Stones, the easy ones, but to find the other 2 Void Stones and to unlock a bunch of favorite map slots, you will need to kill bosses, a lot of bosses. What I typically do is I dedicate a boss rushing tree where I focus on putting as many bosses in the map as possible and let Maven witness them. I will share the tree in the description, but basically you just kill the map monsters, run to the boss, and then there are 4 bosses at the end of the map, which all can drop all sorts of influenced maps. And then you run those influenced maps, you summon again 4 bosses, which again drop a bunch of maps. You can easily self-sustain, and after a few hours you should have killed enough of these to do a few things. First, you now have collected enough fragments from all these bosses to do Elder and Shaper twice, who again drop a fragment after you kill them. And then using Harvest Crafting, you can swap those fragments for its counterpart, granting you access to Uber Elder, which drops the third Voidstone. Second, you should have Maven witnessed the fights of all those map bosses and talk to Kirak to run several invitations. You'll get awakened support gems from time to time, you unlock more Atlas passive points, and you get Maven fragments to fight the Maven herself. The Guardian invites and Elder Slayer and synthesized bosses give 3 to 4 times as many Maven fragments, so focus on running those. Regular Maven invites are pretty bad. You want to do at least one 10 map boss Maven invite though to unlock the 5-way map device. I would really only take on the Uber Elder and Maven if you have somewhat decent gear, because doing those fights on 1 million DPS just isn't fun. And failing the fight, especially Uber Elder, is rather devastating. You can see the gear I collected before attempting this, and I have the White Wind, Dark Ray Vector boots, the Southbound gloves, Perseverance, and a Blizzard crown. Aim for something similar or you're going to have a rough time. You can now do a few more bosses if you want, it's really almost just for fun in a way. Cirrus, one of my favorite boss fights, gives a favorite map slot. Cortex does the same, and Cortex has a small chance to drop a great unique crit flask. The Cortex map has a good chance to drop from any synthesized map boss. It feels like a 1 in 4 chance if you're wondering how to get that map. Let's talk about some other endgame stuff I'm doing, which doesn't necessarily fall under any other category, in no particular order. First, scrying maps, using the nameless seer. I have a good idea which maps I ultimately want to run, but before I start blasting those maps, I want to scry good div cards onto those maps. You do that by favoring maps with good div cards, choosing those maps because I believe that increases the chance of the seer showing up, and then scrying the div cards of those maps to the maps you ultimately want to run. In my case, I farmed around 25 or so sepulchers and 25 or so spider forests, both at tier 16, to find the seer and scry those maps onto Jungle Valley and Toxic Sewers. Second, unlocking the map device extra slots. You can get the 5-slot map device from defeating a Maven invite that holds 10 Atlas map bosses, and you can get the 6-slot map device from completing a tier 17 map. To make it easy on yourself, as tier 17 maps can be very hard, you can use a Scarab of Bisection to completely remove all prefixes or suffixes, making a tier 17 map considerably easier, and some might say more fun. Third, keep using scouting reports. You don't need Atlas completion anymore most likely, but you will keep dropping Kirak missions and scouting reports. You can encounter high tier blighted maps for oils, the Untainted Valley for XP, or Val Temple for a bunch of double corrupted uniques and jewels. Those all can be amazing in Soul Self-Found. Plus, I think they're fun, so don't miss out. Fourth, don't forget to level support gems or skill gems in your offhand so you can make them 20/20 and then corrupt them for even more damage. A 21/20 gem is so much better than a regular one. 1% more damage may seem small, but it is multiplicative, so it's worth it. And fifth, keep running content you enjoy. I will share my blasting tree, and it's just mechanics I love doing on maps that I love running. I still have a great time in Path of Exile 1, I still adore the endgame, and by simply doing content like this, I increase the odds of dropping upgrades, good gear, lucky drops, etc. I realize I haven't talked that much about the build itself in either this video or the previous one, and why I'm enjoying it so much. First, it's a one-button build, which I love. Second, the build is sort of auto-targeting, because either it's the extra strike in the build that auto-targets, or it's the multi-strike that does it, but all you have to do is stand still, press Frostblades, and your character attacks everything in sight. Third, the range on this skill is pretty nuts, making it great and not really a melee build. Fourth, it has many defensive layers with evasion, spell suppress, fortify, phasing, endurance charges for less physical and elemental damage taken, movement speed, and a little bit of armor. I also managed to get almost ailment immune because of a lucky ancestral vision drop. Let me take a bit of time to explain the endgame build mechanics as far as I understand it. I'm using my own current setup here at level 98. The main skill, Frostblade of Katabasis, is only scaling the hit portion. You don't do anything with the dot component in this build. Ice Bite supports skills with frenzy charges, which we are stacking. Multi-strike is great for attack speed, but I personally don't hit the second and third attack much, I think. It feels good though, good attack speed. Inspiration makes sure you can spam the skill thanks to the mana reduction, and the extra crit is nice. Elemental damage with attacks support seem to be the best multiplier at this stage until you get even more endurance charges, and the crit strike support makes you cap your crit chance to 100%. The summoned skitterbots with bone chill combination increases the chill effect of skitterbots, which scales again with the heat shiver. 30% chill effect means 30% extra fire damage, which is a lot of course. That is effectively another 30% damage multiplier. The General's Cry auto exertion tech had me puzzled a little bit at the start, but it is used for permanent rage uptime. Rage is another attack damage multiplier, so having permanent rage is amazing, and you have 36 of it, meaning 36% more damage. It works thanks to this cry and the passive tree. For the Rage Mastery, you're getting 1 rage per 5 enemy power, and using another Warcry Mastery, all Warcries generate at least 10 power. That means every time you Warcry, you get 2 rage. Rage decays after 3 seconds, but before that you Warcry again with General's Cry, which has a shorter cooldown than 3 seconds and a shorter cooldown than any of the other Warcries, so that means you get at least 2 rage every 3 seconds. Another bit of tech I'm using that's not in the guide is a Searing Exarch implicit on the chest, which is a power charge every 14 seconds. Because you have 100% increased charge duration from the Charge Mastery, this means permanent 3 power charges, increasing your crit chance. Looking at other parts of the tree, the single point in Mana Leech sustains your mana. You can balance spell suppression and get it where you need it, so you have 100% spell suppression. I've also incorporated a Vaal skill because the build didn't have any, so I'm using Vaal Haste every now and then. It's good for rares and map bosses, and the movement speed is good quality of life. And for the rest, I think the build is rather straightforward, especially if you play it from the start like I did. Let's draw a conclusion. I could take the build even further and grind it out completely, which I probably would have done if PoE 2 didn't launch tomorrow. It is an amazing build, it's tanky, it does decent damage, it's fast, it's fun, it has ice shatters all around. I don't know what else to ask for. The path of building is one of the best I've ever seen, and I think it's a great guide to use as a benchmark with clear milestones to aim for. The build is just incredibly solid overall, and having played this in a League Start scenario, I can see myself starting this if it doesn't get nerfed. I can tell by the comments you guys enjoyed the series, so I will likely make another Zero to Hero. Likely the next one will be for Path of Exile 2, however, which I'll be playing, solo self-found of course. I hope you had a good time watching this episode. Let me know what you think. Also, let me know if you have any suggestions. Subscribe and like for more PoE SSF content. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. Love you all. See you soon. Bye bye.